We made this whole no-dig garden for $115, and today I'm going to show you exactly how we did it. Welcome to what's going to be our new veggie garden. So it is this space behind me. Up here there is a big grassy area right close to our house. The wall of my house is about 2 meters behind the camera there, and this area is currently pretty much useless. It's just grass. We've got a pathway here that goes through there to some garden sheds and things over there, but this area is prime real estate for productive garden close to the house, and I'm very excited to turn it into something better than a lawn. You know, in permaculture this would be like zone 1, so I don't want to waste this area with this grass. One thing I am concerned about in this area is it gets very wet and boggy in summer, so that might be a bit of a challenge. It might influence what we grow here, but I'm hoping that by building up above the soil surface, which is heavy clay here, also not ideal, I'm hoping that by building up we might mitigate some of those issues and we might get away with it basically. When we created the bamboo house, which is just out of frame over here, we did this area with the gardens around the edges because we created a whole new landscape basically. But we were left with this grassy area up here. There was a tree here and there was another tree over there that we had to take out. They were invasive weed trees, nothing native. And we had to do that because we needed to make the space for the bamboo house and get rid of the excess shade that they were causing. So we're going to sheet mulch the whole thing. We've got a ton of cardboard that we've collected over the last few months, and we're going to cover this whole area in a couple of layers of cardboard to try to suppress this runner grass that we have here. And then I'm going to make garden beds on top of that. The first thing I have to do, and what I've started to do a little bit of already, is actually cut the grass back that started to grow into the garden bed edges. This one I actually edged before I made the garden bed and it's doing pretty well, but it's summer now and the grass is just growing like crazy because it's the wet season. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge to kind of get that grass out of those beds and then try to keep it out. Of course, the plan will be to put cardboard right up into those garden beds and mulch over the top of it to try to hopefully suppress that grass from growing out. But I'm very excited to see what we can create with this currently pretty useless grassy area. Now, I don't know if you can tell on camera, but it's all a bit slopey. There's a mild slope sort of this way. There's another one sort of down this way, and here, because we actually dug out this path I'm standing on to make the bamboo house, which is just here, there's kind of a really quick slope here. What I'm thinking about doing in this space, because it is a slope, is actually cutting out an area here to put in my new bathtub pond. So it's kind of close to the house and it's on the edge of the garden. So the bathtub will, you know, it'll only go till about here. And then I might, on the end, up the end here, put in sort of a raised bed situation. So we actually have sort of a raised edge all the way along here, because with the bathtub I actually want to cover it with we have like a whole bunch of hardwood cut-offs that we're thinking about sort of surrounding it with to make it look a bit more attractive. So the idea would be to maybe put sort of like a retaining wall, I guess, but not, you know, it's not going to hold too much. It's only going to be like this deep, all the way along this edge, sort of to make a barrier along here and be able to grow stuff all the way up to that edge.
So Nick built this wall out of rocks we had lying around our property already and made this little staircase as well. And that sorted out the sloping problem and gave us an extra garden bed, as you can see as well. So the next stage after this was the sheet mulching. So we'd been collecting cardboard for like 6 months, and this stack was way higher when we started, but it's been awesome because we just had heaps of cardboard and we were ready to go. We had, obviously, as you can see, just plain cardboard, nothing with any dyes or colours on it as much as possible. And the idea is just to suppress the weeds, i.e. the grass, by putting as much cardboard down as we possibly could in order to just grow straight on top of it, rather than trying to get this runner grass out, which is basically impossible. So after putting all of the cardboard down, you can see how we've got it like right into the garden bed there, right up to the edge of the garden bed there. The next stage was to put down some browns, and this is just stuff that Nick collected from all over our property, you know, old leaves and little tiny branches and stuff. So this made up the base layer of our no-dig beds, was this brown organic matter. And you can see the paths starting to come together here. It was a bit tricky to decide how we were going to structure these garden beds because we needed to keep certain pathways clear. So we basically just put beds in between where the pathways were going to go and made sure they weren't too wide. They had to be narrow enough so that you could reach across them easily from either side. That was, you know, my requirement basically. And then we had a whole bunch of wood lying around the property that we used to edge the beds. So this is just an old, I don't know what this was used for, but it's pretty old now. Even though it might have been treated once upon a time, it was a very long time ago. But most of what we used in the productive garden beds came from around the property. So trees we'd cut down. Speaking of which, we had to cut down this tree, well, not really a tree, this plant, which is a variety of bird of paradise, because it was getting way too big and leggy, looking ugly, and it was shading out that little garden I just showed you a second ago at the bottom of the hill. And we decided, you can see it's still alive, we haven't actually killed it, we've just taken it back to the bottom, and it was a great source of greens to make the next layer in our garden. Now, we didn't actually leave them all one piece like this. We actually went back and chopped them up into much smaller pieces, but this was just laying it out to see how much we had and how much we could fit on the garden beds. So that was the second layer, was this these leaves from that plant, and it's looking pretty good so far. You can see the garden beds starting to take shape now. The next step was soil. So we had this big pile of kind of topsoil that we took out of this area when we first scraped it back, which you saw earlier briefly, to make the bamboo house. So Nick actually went and raided that pile and he put that down. Because it was clay soil, he also put some gypsum in there just to help hopefully break the clay up a little bit. And then there was also a second layer, which I'll talk about in a sec. And then there was the sugarcane mulch, and this is the first bed finished. I just wanted to show you this because you can see how much higher it is than all the other unfinished beds once it had been built up with those extra layers of soil and also the layer of the sugarcane mulch. So here you can see the top layer of soil, and what this actually is from tip mulch. But when we got it in the summer, it had actually basically already turned into compost, and we've left it for another 6 months to break down even further in a big pile, and it was full of worms. It looked super healthy. Am I concerned about contaminants? A little bit, but we're just going to roll with it and see how we go. And then the last layer, of course, was the sugarcane mulch, which is one of the few things we bought for this project. So far, everything you've seen has been free, but we actually bought sugarcane bales last year, so we decided to put some of that on top. Here is the second thing we bought, which was some pine bark, and the reason we bought this was to make the pathways. We wanted to put something that we could put down nice and thickly over the top of the cardboard to again help suppress the growth of that grass coming up and through. You can see that, you know, the garden beds are so thick that the chances of any grass coming up through them is pretty minuscule. But even though we have layers of cardboard down, we wanted to make sure we put a thick layer of mulch sort of on top of those as well to make the pathways and to help with that suppression. You might have noticed that elsewhere in the earlier stage of this garden, we had chip bark. that we did about a year ago, and it was the same sort of process. So we kind of went up to an edge here, and we might have to contain this edge over time, but that's okay. It was great to get all of this down, and this was kind of the final stage of the garden at this point, was to get that pathway finished. It took a lot of work bringing all of the pine bark up to the garden from the front of our property, but it was worth it. And you can see what I'm doing here is I'm actually stamping it down because there were some holes. It was not a flat area, so we actually chucked more pine bark into the areas where there were holes to build it up and hopefully make it a little bit more flat. By the way, if you're curious, we're going to be doing a whole video on that bathtub pond in the next month or two, so make sure to subscribe if you want to see that.
Next week, I'm going to publish basically a part 2 to this video where I'm going to show you how we planted it all out. There are a few different beds here for different purposes, and we're experimenting with some different things. So if you'd like to see what we're growing in our first season, growing in this no-dig garden, make sure to subscribe and come back next week for that video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you then. Bye for now.